Eliminating Fears. Welcome to a new short course titled Eliminating Fears, taken from the book Educational Programs by Muteb Alqarni. In this course, we will explore fear and ways to eradicate it or, in the worst-case scenario, mitigate its effects. We will discuss various fears and phobias such as fear of criticism, fear of loss, fear of death, fear of society or what is known as sociophobia, fear of heights, and many others. First, what is fear? Fear is the feeling of danger, and feeling in danger is the feeling of the possibility of harm. When you fear people's words, you fear the possibility of harm from them. And when you fear death, you fear the possibility of harm from death or after death. And when you fear losing your mother, you fear the possibility of being harmed after her. These harms may be imaginary or real. So let's get started. Choose something you fear and apply the upcoming strategies to it. The first way to eliminate fear is to assess your level of fear. Are you afraid of people's criticism, or of losing your parents, or of death and the torment of the grave? Choose your fear and then measure its extent from 1 to 10, where 10 is extreme fear. When you assign a number, for example 6 for your fear of criticism, you'll find that your fear has diminished just by using numbers. It's a remarkable discovery, so always try this trick. Whenever you feel afraid of something, assign it a number, and you'll discover that your fear isn't as significant as your brain makes it seem. You must measure your fear, because who cannot measure it cannot dispel it. Choose a number now for what you fear, then continue listening. And I'll ask you whether your level of fear has decreased at the end of the course or not. After determining your level of fear, let's discuss the reasons for this fear. First, take this rule. Every fear is formed for 3 reasons. 1. Inherited instincts. 2. Cognitive perceptions. And 3. Avoidant behaviors. Inherited instincts are the brain structures and innate tendencies that we inherited from our ancient generations. So our brains today inherit traits from millions of years ago. Cognitive perceptions are the mistaken perceptions we hold in our minds about the things or matters we fear. Avoidant behaviors are the actions we take that reinforce our fears more than dispel them. Inherited instincts account for 20% of your fear problem, perceptions account for 50%, and behaviors account for 30%. These make up 100%. So let's discuss each cause in detail. The first cause of your fear is inherited instincts. The ancient man used to live in the forest naked without family or shelter. He lived in fear every moment. He had a small wooden stick to fight fierce beasts like tigers, lions, and predators. Fear always dwelled within him. He slept afraid and woke up afraid. He was always afraid because he wanted to survive. This intense fear is precisely the reason for our survival as humans to this day. We inherited this fearful brain from our ancient ancestors millions of years ago. So today, we fear dangers to survive. We inherited defense mechanisms that alert us to perceive risks. These inherited mechanisms in our brains function like alarm bells. When you intend to cross the street, your brain sounds an alarm warning you of the danger of an oncoming car that might hit and kill you. When you see a loose tiger on the street, your brain sounds an alarm to warn you. This alarm forces you to make 2 decisions, either to advance and fight or to retreat and flee. You either advance and attack the tiger or flee and leave the place. This is called fight or flight response. There's a third option, which is freeze. Sometimes you freeze when you see an oncoming car that might hit you, neither advancing nor retreating. The most important thing you now know about fear is that fear is an automatic alarm sounded by your brain when it sees a danger, so that you do three things, all starting with F. Either fight, flight, or freeze. These are involuntary decisions that occur in your mind and in the blink of an eye, leading you to make a quick decision out of three options. Every fear occurs due to 20% of these inherited instincts. So when you face a large crowd and plan to speak in front of them, and you feel afraid, the reason is your brain, as it sounds an alarm warning of danger. But what is the danger? People may criticize you, reject you, or laugh at you. The brain interprets the situation as you living alone and rejected, which means you won't survive but die alone in misery. It's a false alert and a misleading alarm from the brain, which your entire body reacts to, just as the civil defense reacts to a false phone call. Your heart races, your lips dry, your tongue stumbles, all because of a false alert. When you feel your heart racing, your lips drying, and your tongue stumbling, you'll make three decisions. Either freeze in place, fight and confront, or flight and flee. Remember that your brain acts like a loving friend, so don't blame it for its false alerts. It's trying to protect you from potential deadly danger. It wants you to survive. It's truly your faithful friend. But unfortunately, it errs in its warnings. So, you need to train it well. For example, say aloud to your brain, "There's no danger from the crowd or the public, my dear brain. The crowd won't devour me. They're not ferocious tigers or wolves, my inherited brain. And if they assault or intentionally defame me, they'll be held accountable. If they reject me, I'll live in a law-abiding society. We're not in the jungle, my brain." In short, train your brain. Remember that training your brain to differentiate between real danger that leads to your death and imaginary danger that won't cause your death requires intensive effort and constant repetition. The brain is inherited from millions of years ago, and it can't be changed overnight. When your brain says, "People will mock you and laugh at you," say audibly, "If people mock me, it's better than scaring me." Did you know that if people actually mock you, you'll discover that their mockery isn't truly frightening? You'll discover that the fear of people's mockery burdens you mentally more than the mockery itself. Feelings aren't facts, so your fear doesn't signify the truth of death. Train your brain for several months to only warn you of imminent dangers to your life. The brain makes mistakes, that's a fact, so don't forget this fact. Set reminders through your phone, morning, noon, and evening, so the alarm rings, reminding your brain that everything that scares you is imaginary and unrelated to the struggle for survival. If someone assaults you, they'll be held accountable by the law, and if people reject you, you'll live alone. The current era is safe and different from ancient jungle times. My brain. When you understand inherited instincts and comprehend your brain's automatic error and understand why your heart races and your lips dry, you'll accept them as false alarms and won't flee or freeze, but you'll advance and fight. When you solve the dilemma of inherited instincts, you'll have solved 20% of your fear problem. You don't need to do anything about these inherited instincts other than training your brain not to send false alarms based on them. Confirm to your brain that you will always survive. You are not living in a jungle. Now let's move on to what constitutes 50% of your fears, which are the mistaken perceptions. By solving them and solving inherited instincts, you'll solve 70% of your fear. Mistaken perceptions or simply misconceptions are not inherited, but acquired. Perhaps you acquired them from your society. They are erroneous thoughts that shaped your fear towards certain things. Let's start with fear of people, or what's known as social phobia. You fear people and dread them because of a mistaken thought in your brain that tells you you have more flaws, more mistakes, and more shortcomings than people. It's a misconception that makes you fear people. Correct this mistaken thought and repeat aloud. People have more flaws, mistakes, and shortcomings than me. Repeat that 10 times aloud, and you'll find the fear dissipating instantly. Remember that fear draws its strength from these mistaken thoughts, so when you correct and adjust them, you'll notice a significant reduction in your fear. Try this exercise to overcome social phobia. Choose 3 major flaws in yourself and choose 3 people you fear facing or meeting. Imagine that your 3 flaws are combined in each of those individuals, and you'll notice that you no longer fear them afterward. Repeat this exercise when you're forced to face the crowd. Feel your shortcomings and flaws in each of them and mention them by name. Commit to setting your phone alarm in the morning, noon, and evening, and repeat with each alarm ring. People have more flaws than me, or so-and-so has more flaws than me. Modify the wording in a way that suits you with each exercise and change the individuals you compare yourself to in every reminder. Try this trick for a week. Now let's move on to fear of public speaking, glossophobia. It's a fear that arises because you have a mistaken thought that says to you, the audience may judge my appearance, weight, and image, etc. Imagine the audience. Imagine 3 people from the audience you'll speak in front of in bad shapes, with large weights and ugly images. Imagining them will dispel your thought, as the audience is no better than you. Perhaps you have another mistaken thought that says, the audience will criticize me. Try to change this mistaken thought and repeat, people don't like criticism, and mention 3 celebrities or people from your close community who are in worse situations than you, and haven't been criticized by people or affected by people's criticisms. Changing the thought of your fear means dissipating the imaginary source behind it. Fear is just a thought. What about fear of people's talk? Fear of gossip, not fear of people themselves. It's a fear driven by mistaken thoughts as well. You think that crowds filling a football stadium are talking about you now. Correct this misconception and repeat aloud to yourself, only 2 or 3 of my enemies talk about me. You think your enemies talk about you 24% of the time. Correct that as well. Repeat aloud, my enemies are busy with their personal lives and get tired of focusing on me in every conversation. You think their talk about you is very harsh. Repeat aloud, my enemies' talk is insignificant, and if it's defamation, they'll refrain from it out of fear of legal consequences. Consider their gossip about you as unproductive, although historically it was seen as rewarding, much like how the prophet's companions perceived it. They regarded backbiting and gossip as rewards that would add to their own accounts on the Day of Judgment, drawing from the accounts of those who gossiped about them. Remember that when we correct mistaken thoughts about what scares us, the brain's alarm decreases. With training and repetitions, the brain learns that these are mistaken thoughts it shouldn't warn you about. Likewise, fear of people's looks, scopophobia. You think people are looking at you to judge you, while they're just casting stray glances without focus or judgment. Similarly, fear of people noticing your embarrassment, erythrophobia. It's another mistaken thought that says to you that people notice your anxiety and that shyness is a flaw and weakness and you must control it. Yes, a mistaken thought, as in reality, people don't notice your shyness much, and they don't care about it, and you don't have to control your shyness as it's a natural physiological reaction. Changing the thought reduces fear. That's the rule. Fear of illnesses, hypochondriasis, is also a mistaken thought that tells you all illnesses are fatal, when in fact, most of them are seasonal and non-threatening. Fear of germs, mysophobia, is also due to a mistaken thought that says germs are harmful, when in fact, some of them are beneficial and healthy. Fear of car accidents, amaxophobia, is also due to a mistaken thought that says accidents are deadly and uncontrollable, when in fact, you can control them by not speeding, and most of them are not fatal as today's cars are safer with automatic braking system and airbags. Choose a fear and identify 5 mistaken thoughts you have about it, then try to correct them to dissipate your fear. Similarly, fear of death, thanatophobia, is due to a mistaken thought that says death will suddenly strike you, when in reality, much of it comes due to diseases without sudden attacks and also due to the thought that death is painful, when in fact the human body can endure all pains. Even with traffic accidents, the body releases adrenaline hormones to endure the strongest possible pains. Don't you see that you fight with someone and come out with a broken tooth without feeling its breakage during the fight? Also, there's a mistaken thought that says death is a loss, when in reality, it's a gain, as it's a transition from the worries of the world to another stage, which may be more comfortable and joyful. Similarly, fear of grave torment and fear of the narrowness of the grave and the bald-faced snake, as mentioned in the Islamic traditions, are all fears based on punishment that varies in occurrence according to scholars. In fact, the punishment of the grave is not unanimous according to some Islamic scholars like al-Sharawi, who believes that there is no punishment before judgment, so there is no punishment except after the God judgment on the day of judgment. The Quran says, "As for he who is given his record in his left hand, he will say, 'Oh, I wish I had not been given my record and had not known what is my account.'" According to this verse, the disbeliever did not know about his account until the day of judgment when the papers were scattered, not when he was in the grave. Refer to other evidence and correct your thought about the punishment of the grave. Perhaps it's a fear, due to your view of God as severe in punishment. And better than this is to love meeting God, for He is merciful. So, whoever loves to meet God, God loves to meet them. In short, reducing the impact of the thought reduces the impact of fear. Also, fear of loss or separation, or the fear of losing and the death of the mother, father, or son, etc. This is a fear that feeds on the thought that you are responsible for keeping others alive, and that your loved ones are your possessions, and that death means the final farewell and a violation of human rights. All of these are mistaken thoughts. You're not responsible for keeping anyone, and you shouldn't control the inevitable death of all humans, and you can't control it, and you can't defend your possessions and loved ones because you don't own anything in this life. Also, don't forget that the deceased may not want to return to life if given the choice, and may have been content with their place in paradise, away from the worries and sorrows of this world. Remember that fear of death or the death of loved ones can kill you 1,000 times, while death itself will only kill you once. Another fear is fear of financial loss, chromatophobia, or so-called fear of poverty. It's a famous fear that drives one towards stinginess and holding back, and it feeds on the thought that the poor cannot live without money. In reality, it's a mistaken thought, as many of the poor today live in health, safety, well-being, and sufficiency. It's also based on a mistaken thought that says, you must win and not lose, when the correct thought that should be repeated aloud to yourself is that life is profit and loss, and there is no guarantee of profit without loss. So dispel the thought, and the fear dissipates. Job insecurity is also a fear of losing one's job, fueled by the thought that you must always have a job. In reality, your parents and grandparents were without jobs and lived and did not die, but they had more freedom without supervisors and managers, while you now live in slavery under the command of the manager. The same applies to all fears. Fear of spiders and fear of heights and fear of airplanes and others all feed on mistaken thoughts. Correct the thoughts, and the fears immediately diminish. Spiders, for example, are not all poisonous, and heights do not necessarily mean you will fall, and airplanes, according to studies and statistics, are safer and less prone to accidents than cars. Fear is a thought. Remember this rule well. Dispel the thought, and the fear dissipates. Repeat new thoughts audibly to your brain, and the brain will get used to them and reduce the alarm bells triggering. Remember that all the above is based on the principle of fear of the unknown. When you fear spiders, airplanes, and others, you fear them because you are ignorant of the consequences and the serious consequences that result from them. It looks like this scenario. If you decide to enter a cave with a ghost, whose characteristics you don't know, your fear of this unknown and undescribed ghost will increase more than if you knew it was a ghost with the size of an elephant, etc. Ignorance of the ghost's qualities multiplies your fears more. Yes, get to know these unknown ghosts behind your fear. Know their qualities, thoughts, and correct them, as knowing them reduces the fear of them. List 5 mistaken thoughts about your fears, then try to correct them by repeating their alternatives to yourself, audibly. When the mistaken thoughts are resolved, 50%, and you understand the inherited instincts, 20%, you will have solved 70% of your fear problem. 30% remains requiring approach behaviors, not avoidance ones. Fear is treated more by behavior and action than by words and speech. The presence of fear of something means that you avoid that thing, believing that it protects you from danger and harm. These are avoidant actions used to avoid the triggers of your fear. Remember that repeating these actions tricks your brain into thinking that the triggers of your fear are real, not imaginary. So what's the solution? Start with approach actions. Remember this rule well. Solving fear is getting used to it, not completely eradicating it. Don't forget this golden rule. Fear cannot be completely eradicated, as humans have inherited a fearful brain for millions of years equipped with automatic defense mechanisms. Your fear will not be completely removed unless you undergo suicidal drug effects that disable defense mechanisms in your brain. Solving fear is getting used to it, in what is called fear habituation. You must enter your fear and live with it until you get used to it. You must approach your fear through exposure to it and its triggers. Do you fear spiders? Approach them and do not avoid them. Fear people? Approach them and do not avoid them. Approach and get used to. The goal of approach actions is to get close to your fears. By approaching, you feel that fear is unreal. However, the most important step in carrying out approach actions is to gradually approach your fear. In other words, identify the actions and behaviors that trigger your fear gradually, and number them from 1 to 10, starting with the lightest trigger first. If you fear public speaking, try speaking in front of one person first, then gradually try in front of 2, then 3 of your family members, then 5 of your friends, and so on gradually until you speak in front of a large audience. Gradation will protect you from psychological shocks that may multiply your fear due to exposure to very scary stimuli that you cannot tolerate. Gradually approach and get used to your fear triggers, and remember that your goal is to dissipate and reduce fear, not intensify it and multiply it with major stimuli. We have 3 types of exposure. 1. Imaginal exposure, meaning imagining that you are holding some spiders, imagining that you are sick because of germs, and imagining that you are facing a mocking audience. Imagine that for minutes. The second type, virtual reality exposure, meaning buying a virtual reality device from Amazon that puts you in front of a real audience, so you experience facing the audience for real. Refer to the self-confidence course. 3. Real exposure, meaning gradually exposing yourself to stimuli in your real, non-virtual environment. Do you fear people's words, criticism, and insults? First, ask yourself, why do the homeless on the streets not care about people's insults towards them? It's constant exposure to insults. The homeless discovered that insults don't change anything. Try exposing yourself to insults so you don't fear them. Record the most vulgar words you fear hearing through a voice note or memo on your phone. Speak about yourself as if you were another person insulting you. Mention all the qualities you fear hearing, then listen to this recording repeatedly and try to respond to it with neglect. Respond and say, "Keep going, I don't care. Yeah, you are right. What is else?" Intensive exposure to words you fear hearing will rob them of their true meaning. Remember the following. The solution to fear is to become accustomed to it. Identify the fears you experience. Make a list of approaching behaviors you intend to do gradually. Are you afraid of losing your parents, children, possessions, or money? Try the philosophy of minimalism, acknowledging that you don't own anything. Ease control over matters and let fate take its course, thereby reducing your fear of loss. Are you afraid of losing money? Try donating $10 today, then $30 tomorrow, then $50, then donate $100. Try gradual progression in everything. Are you afraid of heights? Try climbing on a high chair, then on a ladder, then climbing and looking down at the street. From the top of a building, then climbing and looking from the top of a mountain, then flying on airplanes. The important thing is to progress gradually. Identify the fears you experience and compile a list of approaching behaviors you intend to adopt gradually. Do you fear losing loved ones, possessions, or money? Consider embracing the philosophy of minimalism, recognizing that true ownership is transient. Release your grip on control and allow events to unfold, thus diminishing your fear of loss. Concerned about financial loss? Begin by donating $10 today, followed by $30 tomorrow, then $50, and eventually $100. Embrace incremental steps in all endeavors. Fearful of heights? Start by ascending a high chair, then a ladder, progressing to looking down from a building, a mountain, and eventually flying in an airplane. The key is to advance gradually in your pursuits. One final aspect remains to conclude this course. Every preceding fear, whether it's the fear of heights, spiders, confined spaces, filth, public speaking, or criticism from others ultimately derives from the fear of death. We can trace all these fears back to death and the innate desire for survival. If you fear death, you naturally fear diseases and spiders. Hence, the main advice is straightforward. Accept death, and you'll find yourself accepting all your fears. By embracing mortality, you'll also embrace the possibility of rejection, abandonment, and even starvation. Embrace death, and you'll confront curses, threats, and sudden illnesses with newfound equanimity. When you accept death, you'll find acceptance of all fears. Reflect on this perspective and inquire, what is your fear number now? Finally, we have reached the concluding episode of the Eliminating Fears course. We learned a lot in this course, and the best way to conclude it is to emphasize that the causes of fear are three. 1. Inherited instincts, inherited from our previous generations, and we must understand them and not be surprised by them. 2. Mistaken thoughts and misconceptions, acquired from our society, and we must correct and change them. 3. Avoidant behaviors, which reinforce our fear, and we must replace them with approaching behaviors that make us gradually accustomed to fear. Inheritances constitute 20%, thoughts 50%, and behaviors 30%. So if you correct them all, you have fixed 100% of your fear. Take this as the final advice. Don't eradicate fear. Remember that the solution to fear is to become accustomed to fear. This course, Eliminating Fears, is taken from the book Educational Programs by Muteb Alqarni.